need Bitcoin exposure, but with less volatility, less downside risk, even if it means muted upside risk. And so MicroStrategy exists to offer those products to the market. You could buy their convertible bond. The quote unquote digital asset reserve is filled with pre-mined coins like Solana and XRP and Cardano, right? A lot of the Silicon Valley venture capitalist firms that donated to Trump's campaign this time around. A core principle of conservatism is that you want small, limited government. Well, government with a money printer is obviously going to continue to get bigger and more intrusive in people's lives. And so, but with Bitcoin, you have to be a lot more diligent at who you're giving capital to. So I think more valuable enterprises are going to get funded, and then capital destructive businesses are not going to get that. The worst thing is when people in your life that aren't Bitcoiners know you're into Bitcoin, and they try to have conversations with you about it, and they don't know anything. I've always thought Peter Schiff is a secret Bitcoin holder.
How did you get started with the conservative case for Bitcoin? How did the idea even come in your head of like, let's focus on the thoughts, and how did you get on the main message for the book?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robin. So I started writing it in 2023. Basically, I could kind of see the writing on the wall that Bitcoin and the American right wing were going to intersect. And before I got into Bitcoin, I was super into like normie, like Republican politics. I voted for Trump in 2020. I was pretty adamant that, we need to, if we just get the right guy in office, that'll fix everything. I had that mentality big time before I got into Bitcoin. So I was kind of familiar with a lot of the mainstream conservative positions, especially the pro-America position. The founding fathers built this great establishment, and they had these fantastic ideas. So how can we live up to them? And when I started to get into Bitcoin, I realized that everything I believed, through conservatism and the founding principles of America is pretty impossible to achieve when you have fiat money, right? Like, how can you actually drain the swamp and limit the size of government when government has the ability to print money? So that's basically the core idea of my book. And thankfully, I couldn't have foreseen like Trump being so vocally pro Bitcoin. And obviously he's now like more pro crypto, but Bitcoin and politics have definitely intersected for better or for worse. And I like to use his book as a resource for educating people on the right wing. They come to me, they're saying, hey, Trump's saying all this stuff about Bitcoin, like, how can I understand it? And I feel like having a book specifically tailored towards that worldview is a great thing. And it's not that I think Bitcoin is only for conservatives. There's a progressive case for Bitcoin. There's all sorts of different angles and lenses that you can view Bitcoin through. So, and I felt like this was the angle that I was well positioned to take, and I wanted to write the book. So I'm really glad I did.
Really cool. And for people that are not familiar with the book, what's kind of the core thesis of the conservative case for, like, what's kind of the conservative case for Bitcoin?
Yeah. So if you think about the founding values of the United States, life, liberty, and property, you don't have true property rights under a fiat currency, right? Because they can devalue the currency by printing more units and effectively stealing your property. So Bitcoin gives you property rights. It gives you free speech because you can send any Bitcoin transaction without censorship. You can attach any sort of message to it. It restores the nuclear family, which is a key pillar of conservatism, right? It's the idea that the family is more important to you than the state. And with fiat money and the rampant inflation we've seen over the last few decades, that's forced families to sort of dissipate, right? You have more households where both parents are working. You have higher divorce rates. People are starting families later in life because the financial burden is just so difficult on young people in an economy with really high inflation like we have. And so there's a numerous amount of factors that appeal to conservatives, but they're pointing the finger at the wrong culprit, when really the culprit is fiat money, and Bitcoin fixes a lot of these issues that, instead of turning to the state and politicians to fix, we need to go after sort of the real culprit, which is fiat money. And the main problem there too is government spending, right? A core principle of conservatism is that you want small, limited government. Well, government with a money printer is obviously going to continue to get bigger and more intrusive in people's lives. And so A good example we're seeing of this now is Doge, right? Elon is trying to cut government spending, get rid of all these bureaucrats, all these programs. And sure, he's doing some of that, but you're really, when you look at the math, you're only scratching the surface, because the entitlement programs, the military spending, interest payments on the debt, this is the large majority of the budget, and that stuff's not getting touched, and they can continue to finance those destructive capital programs because they have a money printer. So if you really are honest about how can we limit the size of government, step one is in the Federal Reserve, and step two is adopt Bitcoin. And so that's one of the key arguments I make in my book.
Yeah, and it's really funny with Doge, because I've just watched the the podcast literally today with Elon Musk and Joe Rogan that dropped, I think, like 1 or 2 days ago, and he might not say it, and you might have a different view on it, but I think Elon Musk is such a Bitcoiner. And like, he talks about social security being a pyramid scheme, literally on the podcast. He talks about all those things of government spending, and how the government is kind of the biggest scam of all. Like, he talks about everything, and I always like, why aren't you a public Bitcoin maxi? Like, why not that?
Right. Well, I think he's Satoshi, actually. That's my running theory. And it's gotten hate. Yeah, it's gotten hate on Bitcoin Twitter, because obviously a couple of years ago he did the whole Doge thing, like a Dogecoin, not the Doge Department of Government Efficiency. He's kind of trolled Bitcoin maximalists. So I'll give you the main points there. Why I think I'm not 100% certain, but he's my personal leading candidate. One is, like you said, he says these things. He's very, very libertarian. He seems to have this kind of Austrian background. And back when Satoshi sent out the original white paper to the cypherpunk mailing list, Elon Musk's x.com email address was on that list. So he was involved in this community. I mean, for crying out loud, he worked on PayPal. He was building digital payments prior to Bitcoin being released. And then there's more esoteric details. So like his son's name is X Ash Archangel 12, the X-AE, whatever, really weird name. But Ash is Satoshi in Japanese. Let's see what else. He has the plethora of domains that Satoshi needed, right? Obviously, Satoshi understood computer science, but he also understood monetary history. He understood politics and government. All these different spheres came together to create Bitcoin. Elon Musk, he's obviously well read and well researched and well studied, and across all of these different domains. They kind of speak in a similar dialect, right? When Satoshi's emails were leaked, we saw he used the word retarded, and he had this very like, I don't care attitude. If you don't get it, I don't have time to explain it to you. Elon Musk, very, very similar personality. They both use two spaces after periods. The list kind of goes on and on.
It's interesting. Also, the attitude of like, oh, I moved on to other projects. I don't care. Like, I think it's good enough, and I have other things and more. That's Elon Musk's whole life, right? With like, he builds things and they kind of live on its own, like Tesla, SpaceX, all those things, and then all of a sudden now he goes into government buildings and tries to figure out where payments are coming from and payments are going. So it would that would be hilarious.
Right. And then think about it this way too. Satoshi has 1 million Bitcoin that he has not touched. I'll be honest, even if I was Satoshi, I'd be touching those Bitcoins and cashing in, right? So there's a good chance Satoshi is already extremely wealthy if he doesn't need or feel the temptation to move those coins. And so Elon Musk, of course, being as wealthy as he is, he wouldn't be tempted to touch those.
Yeah, it wouldn't even make a real. I mean, it does make a difference, but maybe not that big as like. Yeah. He can already spend everything he wants, and he also says, like Elon Musk says multiple times already in interviews. I heard him saying, "Oh, money is basically just information and just a ledger," and I'm like, yeah, like. Yes, it is. Like you get Bitcoin. I can see it, but you're just not public about it, which would also make sense. Like if I would if I would be Elon Musk and I would have actually created Bitcoin and therefore also Satoshi Nakamoto, I wouldn't be that vocal about it and then just buy it a little bit. Like he is the only with Tesla, the only S&P 500 company that has Bitcoin. I think still today, like they have 10,000 Bitcoin, and it's still the only company in the S&P 500.
Yeah, that's true. He was an adopter of Bitcoin on the corporate side more earlier than anybody else, really.
Absolutely, really cool. That theory, I didn't heard you saying that's like that caught me off guard. It's really cool. That's a really cool story and a really cool theory actually. Also, what is your current take overall on the new administration with Trump coming in with so much new things of like even like podcasters, influencers going in the White House press rooms. Like there's so much. There's probably like 50 things that I could point to that are kind of new and really interesting. Also, even with like the Epstein files and the JFK files, maybe that we can see maybe down the road somewhere.
It's for me, I found a lot of it to be quite distracting. When you look at what's actually been accomplished, it's not the same Trump that ran in 2016. This is certainly a new regime. He's backed a lot by Silicon Valley elites, and that's why it doesn't surprise me that the quote unquote digital asset reserve is filled with pre-mined coins like Solana and XRP and Cardano, right? A lot of the Silicon Valley venture capitalist firms that donated to Trump's campaign this time around, they pre-mined a lot of those coins and got early access, right? And so there's a lot of enriching the founders going on. There's not immigration reform or deportations like he ran on. That that was kind of his main platform in 2016, but so far it's March of 2025. There's actually been less deportations than under the Biden administration at this time, right? And so this idea that Trump's going to come in and he's going to be truly America first and he's going to really stand up for the American people, I think is pretty much a fugazi. Really, he's Silicon Valley first, he's GDP first, he's stock market first. And that's fine if you can recognize it for what it is, right? I think the main play I'm looking at in terms of the administration is what is he going to do for asset prices? Like, how can I position my portfolio as an investor to benefit regardless of if I agree with some of his moves or not? And right now we're seeing markets tank. And I don't think that's going to be the case for very long, right? One of his main key performance indicators for himself is, hey, the stock market goes up when Trump's in charge. The economy is booming. It's roaring. Biden economics or whatever his catchphrase was a lot of his platform in this cycle, right? And so I think right now we're seeing this kind of stalemate in terms of tariffs. Are they going to happen? What are they not? And markets hate uncertainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now. But Trump has been very vocal about wanting to get long-term interest rates down and pretty esoterically wanting to weaken the dollar, right? Because if you weaken the dollar, a lot of his objectives fall into place, right? He wants to onshore manufacturing in the United States. Well, you need a weaker dollar so you can export to other countries. He wants the 10-year rate to go down. If the dollar goes down, the 10-year rate will go down. He wants a stimulated economy with asset prices increasing. Well, if the dollar, if the DXY is strengthening, it's going to be hard for the stock market and for Bitcoin to go up. And so the primary thing I'm looking at in terms of the administration is the economic side of things. And it's a balancing act, right? Because if you have Doge cutting all these government programs, that's going to cause GDP to go down because for some reason, government spending is calculated in the economic productivity, even though government spending is destructive. You have all these workers wasting away doing, LGBT reform for South Africa or whatever they do in in the government. I don't understand what's going on with the Doge. They're cutting all this stuff, but that will negatively impact GDP. That will negatively impact employment, and that could give Powell the ammunition he needs to cut interest rates on the short term. So I think there's a lot of things to be bullish about that this administration is doing, even though the first month and a half has been pretty underwhelming, especially in terms of market activity.
there's also this whole, like, I mean, he had his own meme coin, but I usually disregard that because it's Trump is used to selling things with his name on, and he was probably not really involved in this. But what kind of shocked me is the shitcoin strategic reserve, where he puts like Solana and other things in there, where like, okay, if he says like Bitcoin and Ethereum, I couldn't even live with that. Like I would even call that, but putting that other things in there is like that goes almost a little bit too far, and it's very underwhelming for me and almost disappointing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I saw that. I've been trying to stay off of Twitter on the weekends just to disconnect, and I pulled it up and I saw that, and I immediately closed it and just sighed because it's so much of a distraction, right? Bitcoin is sound money. Ethereum and XRP and Solana and Cardano, these are pre-mined, unethical tokens, right? They're at best, they're technologies. At worst, they're outright scams. And for Bitcoin to be associated with them is totally incorrect, right? Bitcoin is hard money with nobody in control. It's a neutral digital commodity. And it's telling that you even saw guys like Brian Armstrong from Coinbase and Peter Schiff stand up against the shitcoin reserve too, right? Brian Armstrong makes money selling shitcoins. That's his entire business model. And he still recognizes Bitcoin is different from everything else. And there's no point in having a strategic stockpile of these other things.
That was not present enough on the X feed of mine. I saw that Peter Schiff called Bitcoin a digital gold. Like,
Yeah.
did we, like, no, it was just like, yeah, Peter Schiff called it, and nobody really react. Like, there was some buzz around it, but that's big. Peter Schiff calling Bitcoin digital gold.
That was his best Bitcoin take ever. I don't know that he'll be able to top that. He's totally capitulated, right? It is digital gold.
Yeah, and we know like the digital version of something usually has a way bigger market. If we're thinking of like, hey, like the digital version of music opens up a way bigger market than the analog version. Like we can go down the list. That's a small sidetrack there, but it is best Bitcoin take, and it's the first really pro Bitcoin take I ever heard from him. All the other things were like weird. So it's interesting that he gets involved. Do you think he also holds some Bitcoin?
Yeah, you read my mind. I don't want to get too tangential. We'll revert back to the main point about the SBR, but I've always thought Peter Schiff is a secret Bitcoin holder. I kind of really reinforced that. It was about 2 years ago. Him and his son Spencer Schiff had a public spat about Bitcoin, and Spencer Schiff, he's super young, Gen Z, pro Bitcoin, pro AI, pro technology, and I think Peter Schiff's whole shtick has just been a marketing ploy because I mean that's what he's known for. He's not even really known as the gold guy; he's known as the anti-Bitcoin guy. And if you look at his business, Schiff Gold, they don't accumulate gold; they sell gold. So he's trying to dump his gold bags onto the market so he can secretly accumulate Bitcoin. I think that's almost obvious, but to get back to the main point with the Bitcoin reserve, while Trump has kind of fumbled the bag so far at the federal level, I'm still very optimistic at legislation at the state level. That's one of the things I love about America is you have 50 sovereign states who can more or less act in their own regard. It's a very decentralized nation like Bitcoin. That's actually another point I make in my book is America is decentralized just like Bitcoin. But on that point, you have 23 different states have introduced some form of legislation to enact a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now, not all SBR legislation is created equal, right? It could be introduced in a really blue Democratic state, and there's just a slim chance that that'll pass at this point in time. But what it is it's this slow moving of the needle forward, right? A couple years ago, it would make no sense for any politician to introduce that legislation. There was no demand for it. It would have been very out of left field. It would have made them look honestly kind of foolish, right? You're introducing legislation to accumulate magic internet money. But now we've reached the point where there's no career risk for doing that. And to introduce that legislation, there's a base for it that would get fired up by it. And nobody's going to look at you like, oh, you're a total idiot for even suggesting the idea. So the Overton window is shifting. And I think at some point this year, one of the states will pass that legislation. I don't think we'll see all 50 states this cycle, but I think over the next 10 years we'll see all 50 states, and I'm excited to see who actually passes it first, because right now it's been a bunch of talk, but we haven't seen any papers signed and T's crossed and I's dotted. But I think that'll happen this year, and I think that's going to be this. Parker Lewis talks about gradually then suddenly. I still think we have a bit more of the gradually left over the next 4 years. If we think this Bitcoin halving cycle, this sort of political election cycle, I think it's going to be more gradually, and the market was expecting suddenly.
Yeah, like things tend to take longer times than we think. It's also interesting because I think in the last few years we are working towards that the public sees the separation between Bitcoin and crypto better, and is in that regard maybe the shitcoin reserve, strategic shitcoin reserve, even a step backwards, where all of a sudden the public sees like that's all the same, like there's no difference between Solana and Bitcoin, and in that direction kind of.
Yeah, I would say it's a step backwards, but I think also over the last year we've made 10 steps forward. If you look at 2021, there was obviously a ton of obfuscation. And then in 2022, you had Sam Bankman-Fried going under and the whole FTX saga. But at that time, there was a prevailing narrative that Bitcoin is flawed, XYZ reasons. It can't scale. It's too slow. And here's my shitcoin. It does things better, faster. That was pretty like a common narrative. But over the last year, the dominance of altcoins, one, it's not there financially. Bitcoin dominance is up from 40% in 2022 to 60% now. But the primary thing people think about with crypto now is meme coins. Hawk Tuah coin, Fart coin, Trump coin, like Solana meme coins are the dominant crypto alternative, non-Bitcoin crypto thing going on right now. It's not like in 2021 where you had, Ethereum claiming to be some kind of technology. You're seeing altcoins move further and further to the full-blown casino Ponzi. Like everyone knows it's a scam. We're not trying to pretend anymore. And I think that's really good, right? Because now they're being honest. They're not lying and saying we're all these various technologies. People have just fully pushed it towards the casino. And so I think that's actually a major step forward, because a normal person can look at Fart coin or Hawk Tuah coin and know that's a scam. Obviously, that's gambling. And they can see a difference between that and Bitcoin. So I think, yeah, the shitcoin reserve is a step backwards, but I do think that distinction is a lot more clear now than it was a couple years ago. And the ETFs were a big help with that, right? The fact that BlackRock gave that stamp of approval for Bitcoin as an investable asset, and a lot of traditional financial institutions are putting out research on Bitcoin. They're not putting out research on anything else. I think that those are all great signs that we're headed in the right direction in terms of really educating the rest of the world on the distinction between Bitcoin and crypto.
Yeah, I want to get to the ETFs in a second, because I think they are kind of overlooked and it's the second year. But first, one more thing on the shitcoin side. Do you think, like in a free market, things survive if they have value? And I feel like we never really had a free market. I don't know if you agree with that. Do you think shitcoins will long term, I'm thinking like 50, 100 years, survive? Because like there's also casinos and stuff like that. Will those, as, I don't know, digital art or like speculative casinos, find some kind of market, or can we get rid of them?
I agree. We've never had a free market. You can't have that when money and interest rates are centrally planned. And I do think, let's call it tokenized assets, will exist in some capacity. I don't think it's going to be the shitcoins we see today. I think what could happen is Apple stock could trade as a token, where you can have self-custody of Apple stock and it can trade 24/7, 365 globally. But the question you have to ask yourself is, how can I position my capital today to benefit from that? Because it's not buying meme coins or various random tokens. And even then, what's the total addressable market cap of tokenized equities? it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be anywhere close to what Bitcoin's total addressable market is, right? Bitcoin has a total addressable market of all the savings in the world, which is estimated from anywhere, $400 trillion to $900 trillion. The best you could do with tokenized equities is the S&P has a market cap of what, 30 trillion? You'd be hoping to capture some of that, versus Bitcoin is going after all of stocks, all of real estate, all of gold, all of fine art, all of treasuries, any way that humans have used to store value. Bitcoin is competing with that, and it has superior scarcity, portability, divisibility, fungibility, all these things. And so Bitcoin is going for a much larger pie, and it's a much higher certainty that it will actually obtain some of that. And so I'm not totally opposed to the idea of tokenizing certain things, but the tokens you see out in the market right now, they all underperform Bitcoin. None of them have a real viable use case at this moment. Like, what does Solana do? It's a platform for creating gambling coins. That's Ethereum is the same thing. So I think this is kind of Saylor's point, why he beats around the bush, and some of his language has been annoying, right? Because he talks about digital tokens. I don't think any of the things we see now are that, but I think it's good that we get that regulatory clarity, right? I think as long as the state creates a level playing field for all of this, Bitcoin will win. Like, that doesn't concern me. So I think, clear legislation, fair playing field, Bitcoin wins in that environment.
Absolutely, really. That's super interesting with the free market. To the ETFs quickly, how are they kind of overlooked right now? Because I think in the ETF, it's like the second year they really get going, and they need a little bit of time. And also, those products are usually better if they already have some track record. Is that something that you're looking forward in 2025? The ETFs kind of slowly and quietly actually just accumulating and putting a lot of purchasing power in Bitcoin?
Yes, it absolutely is. And it's among a plethora of what I think of as long-term catalyst, right? Everyone has a fish brain, especially on Bitcoin Twitter, and they're looking for one-off events that will cause the Bitcoin price to rip. But the ETF, it's a paradigm shift, right? We went from a regime where brokerage accounts had no way to get direct Bitcoin exposure to now brokerage accounts do have a way to get direct Bitcoin exposure. And so over time, we're going to continue to see the ETFs accumulate more Bitcoin, or rather investors accumulate more Bitcoin, but using the ETF as the vehicle, right? In 2024, they had $40 billion worth of inflows. I don't think that pace will necessarily slow down. And furthermore, there are more of these kind of long-term catalysts, right? You've got MicroStrategy convertible bonds. That's another vehicle for investors to get Bitcoin exposure. You have Bitcoin treasury companies. That's, again, not a singular one-off event, a singular, gasoline on the fire catalyst, but it's throwing some more logs into the fire, so to speak. It's these catalysts that take a longer time to play out, but you're opening more doors for capital to go from the traditional financial system to the Bitcoin financial system. And I think there's a lot of those types of catalysts that haven't even been created yet, right? Think like Bitcoin-backed mortgages or products that are like a Bitcoin rolled in with the treasury bond. There's literally no source. We had options on the ETFs get launched earlier this year, right? That opens up a whole nother game, because institutions can't just buy spot Bitcoin, right? They need to hedge their exposure. They need different types of vehicles with different risk reward profiles, Bitcoin exposure with different degrees of volatility. And so I think now that we have SAB 122, we're going to get more of those products built out, because now banks can offer Bitcoin custody products. And these are, again, they're not going to build, JP Morgan is not going to build a Bitcoin platform overnight. It's going to take a long period of time. And so I think we'll see more of these products similar to the ETF, in that they allow TradFi to get Bitcoin exposure. And I think they'll all continue to do well, and just slowly but surely more capital is going to find its way into Bitcoin.
Interesting. Yeah, those bridges are super interesting. I see ETFs and all those things kind of as bridges from the fiat world to Bitcoin world. Even like with like exchanges, like Bitcoin only exchanges, like Swan, Relay, and all those things. They are basically just bridges that bring us from the fiat system to the Bitcoin system. And it's actually, I always thought that we kind of have most of the big vents open, that we already have the big bridges done, but they just the first people just getting started with walking over that. It's interesting that you brought up that you expect way more of those bridges and those things that being built out. How much, if we see a bridge between fiat and Bitcoin, and it's like 100 meters wide, how much of the bridge is already open? Like how much would you say that we already have the products and services in place in order to have? I mean, we don't get to full Bitcoin adoption. People still have to cross the bridge, but how much of the bridge is already open?
That's a really good question. I like that framing. I would say the ETFs were half the bridge. They opened up, that was the biggest thing, to get direct spot Bitcoin exposure. And I think through MicroStrategy, that another 25% of the bridge is open, not through their equity, but through their convertible notes, right? And through their products like Strike, their preferred stock. Those are things that institutional investors with billions of dollars are allocating capital into. And so I think the majority of the bridge is open. I mean, I think there's a few pools of capital that can't really get clean exposure, right? Like the real estate market. I think more Bitcoin-backed mortgage-type products or home equity lines to buy Bitcoin. I think that could unlock some serious capital, because if you look at the average American, half their wealth is in their 401k and the other half is in their home. And so the ETFs allow that 401k wealth to get into Bitcoin, but you need some way to get that home equity value into Bitcoin. So I think that's kind of the last whale left. But like you said, the bridge can be open, but they have to cross it. And I think we'll see the crossing over the next 10 years.
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now, if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition, for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in the jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. Yeah, it takes some time. Like, even if you think back like 10 years, it was so hard to even buy Bitcoin. I had actually yesterday a talk with someone that bought Bitcoin in 2013, and he talked about how he had to meet some guy, and he felt like he's doing some drug dealing because he was buying Bitcoin back then. So it was already very hard in the past, and now it's like, oh, like you can just go anywhere and you buy Bitcoin, like PayPal, like there's so many places that you already have that you can buy Bitcoin.
Right. That's such a great point. We've come a long way. And one more point I'll add is like, this has to happen if you want Bitcoin to get to $1 million, right? Right now, its market cap is $2 trillion, primarily driven by retail. Retail got us to, I would say, to a $1 trillion market cap, right? In 2021, that was very retail driven. You had the stimulus checks and the whole Robinhood, GameStop saga. That was the peak retail investor craze, and that got Bitcoin to a $1 trillion market cap. But it wasn't until the ETFs launched that we got from 1 trillion to 2 trillion. And we're going to need these bridges to get built and to get crossed for Bitcoin to go from 2 trillion to 20 trillion. And that's just a fact of the matter, right? And people look at these traditional financial products and they'll rebuke them saying, well, the whole point of Bitcoin is to dismantle this system. Well, sure, but this isn't Bitcoin capitulating to traditional finance. This is the other way around, right? The Bitcoin network operates entirely independently, and the fact that it exists, it can't go away, it can't be shut down. You're seeing the world adapt itself around Bitcoin. Bitcoin hasn't changed. The world is changing to mold itself to Bitcoin.
It's a good framing. I like that. You brought up MicroStrategy. What do you think will be the role in the future of MicroStrategy? They have so many. If we actually end up in a Bitcoin world where there is a maximum of like maybe, I don't know, 15 or 18 million Bitcoin total, and they already have 500,000 of that, what kind of a role will they play? Or what do you think will the future of MicroStrategy be?
Under a pure Bitcoin standard where fiat doesn't exist, I'm not sure what role they play. But I think they play the most important role in this transition. So if you're an investor, you can't just buy spot Bitcoin and put it on your cold card like you can if you're a retail investor. And they have to manage risk, right? I can stomach volatility because I'm 24. I have no obligations. I have nobody to report to. I don't have to sell assets anytime soon. But if you're managing money on the behalf of someone else, you can't have 75% drawdowns in your portfolio, right? But how can you get Bitcoin exposure with that in mind, right? You need Bitcoin exposure, but with less volatility, less downside risk, even if it means muted upside risk. And so MicroStrategy exists to offer those products to the market. You could buy their convertible bond and you have 0% nominal risk because they have to pay back the principal on that, but you get the option to convert to MicroStrategy equity, which is correlated to Bitcoin, right? So you have upside Bitcoin exposure with less downside risk. And the fact that they have, 500,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, they have the most options volume in the entire market, very liquid, high volume stock. They're the most well positioned to offer this product to the whales of the world, to large institutional investors. So I think they're going to offer, and this is pretty much what they do, and I think their business is going to continue to grow. They offer a suite of financial products that can give an investor Bitcoin exposure, but with different degrees of upside, different degrees of volatility and risk. And I think they're very well positioned in the market, and I'm incredibly bullish on them. And if you're a Bitcoin maximalist like myself, and you crave Bitcoin exposure, if your hurdle rate is Bitcoin, it's a good equity to own for that reason, because they use BTC yield as a KPI. Their goal is for the equity to outperform Bitcoin over the long run, accumulate more Bitcoin per outstanding share. And we've seen copycats, so to speak, of this play. But I think, like Bitcoin, there's no second best. I think to some extent that's true within the world of Bitcoin equities, because it's the most volume, because it's the most liquid. I think it can attract the most demand for their convertible notes, with the exception being, Metaplanet is in Japan. So that's an entirely different market. Japanese investors can't buy US equities. So I think there's kind of room for one of these Bitcoin treasury company Goliaths within each market. And the US being the largest capital market in the world, MicroStrategy plays a very important role, being that entity that allows a lot of that capital to get into Bitcoin.
That's super interesting. Also, the Bitcoin yield is something I'm really looking at, because on a personal note, I stopped measuring my net worth in dollars or euros or any fiat currencies, because it's just so volatile. and you feel really smart if Bitcoin goes up 2x, and you feel really dumb if Bitcoin crashes down 40%. But the reality is, you're not 2x smarter just because Bitcoin goes up 2x, and you are not dumber just because Bitcoin crashes down. So I like the idea of a Bitcoin yield of how many more Bitcoin, how many more Satoshis did you accumulate this year versus last year? And this kind of framing of what I'm using personally, and now also like with Bitcoin yield and how many more Bitcoin could you actually accumulate on a company side is super interesting. Do you think that will be maybe someday as like an earnings per share is right now of like, okay, how many Bitcoin could you actually accumulate over the 1 year? And this is kind of a key metric for companies going forward.
Yes, definitely. And it may take a little while longer before that's a mainstream KPI. But if you're already Bitcoin native, if you're a hardcore Bitcoiner, it's your unit of account, that's the only KPI that matters for you when it comes to allocating capital just directly to Bitcoin or buying equity in one of these Bitcoin treasury companies. We're close to 100 companies now that have put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, but most of them aren't using this as a KPI, right? They just bought a little bit of Bitcoin with their cash position. Those stocks, they're not going to outperform Bitcoin. It's not over any kind of longer period of time. The only ones that have any hope of doing it are the ones that use Bitcoin yield as a KPI, because they're objectively making outperformance of Bitcoin their goal. And so, yeah, I think that's the most important metric to look at right now. And over the next 10 years, we'll see a lot more companies adopt that as a KPI. I do think it needs a new name, though, because Bitcoin yield is very deceiving. It makes me think of like BlockFi yield products. And I know that's not what it measures, but yeah, I think it could use a rebrand, so to speak.
Yeah, when I first heard it, I was like, Bitcoin yield, that's that's something sketchy. But then I was like, wait, Michael Seyr is talking about it. I should I should look into it. And they're like, yeah, that has nothing to do with any yield for me.
Yeah. He should have came up with a better name. I also don't understand the strategy rebrand. Maybe he's got a longer term vision. I thought MicroStrategy was like a very household name. It's like changing Twitter to X. I think it's kind of in the same boat. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the rebrand of strategy.
Maybe it's something that comes down the line. Also with the strategy B of like he has different branches of the company of strategy, and then he puts I don't know, strategy bank, like there's like a retail bank for Bitcoin holdings where you can maybe even makes products around like Bitcoin backed loans and stuff like that. So I could imagine a lot, but that's just pure speculation on my side. I do think besides the name, I think they are doing a great job of just positioning themselves more and more as a Bitcoin company. Also from a branding with like the orange and with the B now in the symbol, they could have done the same thing with keeping the micro in front of strategy. I don't know why they did that, but they probably had a good reason for doing that, and maybe we don't know the reason yet. Like maybe there's more coming down the line, but I do think it's very good for them that they have the orange and the B now in there from Bitcoin. So it's for people that don't know anything about strategy or MicroStrategy, they can see it from the beginning of like, oh, they have something to do with Bitcoin.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And if there's anything I've learned, it's don't fade Michael Saylor. That man is a lot smarter than I am. So I trust he's got a plan there with that.
Yeah, and he tends to think things through to the end. It's like,
it's funny. He had strategy.com, the domain already too. That dude's been squatting on some good domains for 2.5 decades now.
Yeah, I mean, hope.com. I do love the fact that if you type in hope.com, you come to Bitcoin, even though I got it once as a negative point. I do like the hope.com site, just like to send it to people. And I sent it once to like a cousin of mine. I'm like, and he's like, hope.com gets to Bitcoin? That seems very sketchy, because they had the hope connected to like religion and stuff like that. I'm like, no, hope is a good thing. Like you want to have, like you want to have hope.
Right.
If you connect hope.com, like there's something else wrong.
Right. I'm glad you kind of brought that up, because I was doing a Bible study recently, and the word hope comes up a lot in the Bible, but I think that the English language is so flawed. Hope, when you initially hear it, you think to be hopeful about something means almost wishful thinking, but the original like Greek and Hebrew word of hope is like a confident expectation. So to hope that Bitcoin is going to go up, it's not wishful thinking. It's not, fingers crossed, maybe this will happen. No, I hope Bitcoin goes up because I'm really confident and I want to express that confidence. I think it's a surefire thing, because I know 21 million is a surefire thing. Fiat debasement's a surefire thing. So therefore, I'm quite hopeful that Bitcoin's exchange rate and purchasing power will go up. And it's not wishful thinking. It's confidence. And I look forward to the day when Bitcoin, hits $1 million, 10 million, 100 million.
Yeah, that's I wish I hope for Bitcoin to go there. It's almost like I wish for Bitcoin to go there. It's like weird in the English language. I do agree with that. Let's go before we get to the end of the podcast. I want to have one more thing with the impact that Bitcoin will have. The one thing that I'm super interested in, like overall the Bitcoin impact on the world, but more importantly with you, I think it would be interesting to talk about taxes. And you brought it up in the beginning, the nuclear family, and the impact that Fiat had on it, and the impact reversed will Bitcoin have on that. Maybe let's start with the family aspect of it. What do you think had Fiat for an impact on the family, and what impact will then reversed Bitcoin have?
Yeah, so Fiat was the hammer and nail that destroyed the nuclear family in America. And if you go to WTFhappened in 1971.com, you can see all the charts showing the separation, higher divorce rates, people having children later in life, people having fewer children, less households where just the dad is working and the mother's able to stay home and raise the children. And now by proxy of that, the kids have to be raised by the state, right? A lot of this has been, the fingers pointed at a bunch of different things, but fiat money is the culprit ultimately. And I'm 24 years old. At my age, 50, 100 years ago, it would almost be expected that I'm getting ready to start a family, right? By 24, mid 20s, you should be getting married, having kids. And that's one of the most important things to do in life, right? Is to raise other humans to be, good contributing members of society. But now people are having fewer kids. They're getting divorced. There's all this entanglement at the family level. And people are like, nobody my age hardly is starting a family. The only people I'm engaged. I got engaged recently. I'm ready to do that. But if I didn't have Bitcoin, I wouldn't feel comfortable enough financially to be able to do that, right? Bitcoin gives me a peace of mind and security that in the future, like I'm going to have that taken care of. But other people my age that aren't on a Bitcoin standard, they don't save in Bitcoin. Not a single one of them is married or even close to getting married and having children. They're waiting until they're in their 30s, right? And Bitcoin totally flips that on its head. I know a bunch of other Bitcoiners my age, they're married, they have kids, and it just gives you that peace of mind and that security. And that's one of the most important things as a family is to be able to provide financially. And Bitcoin really enables that, because you used to be able to just work an average job, right? My grandfather worked a normal job in rural America. He supported 4 children, sent them all to college, bought a house, bought 2 cars, supported my grandmother. Normal incomes don't allow for that anymore. If you have a normal income, you probably have 2 roommates and you can barely afford to pay your bills, let alone raise children, right? And so your options are to save in Bitcoin or to be a really high performing entrepreneur, start your own business, be a doctor or a lawyer, have a really high paying skill. And so not everyone's suited to have a high paying skill, but everybody is suited to save in Bitcoin. It doesn't matter if you're a plumber or if you're a doctor or if you're an accountant or if you're a Bitcoin podcaster. We can all save in Bitcoin. It's almost the way I describe it to my friends is like Dave Ramsey is right about 90% of stuff when it comes to personal finance. It's really simple. Spend less than you make, but the 10% he's missing is you have to save that in Bitcoin. You can't save that in index funds. You can't save it in cash. You can't save it in a basket of stocks, right? You have to save that in Bitcoin because it's the only thing that can reliably outpace fiat inflation.
Absolutely. And I just want to bring up the side you mentioned with what the fuck happened in 1971, basically, because I just realized I never showed that side on the podcast, which is a tragedy, I think, that I never did that. But there's all the charts, and I had I think an evening where I just took 1-2 hours of really looking at those charts, and 1-2 hours is not enough. Because there are many charts, and you really have to dive into them to actually understand them. And it's just a good thing to do if someone listening and never went to that side. I think it's a great side to look at what are the charts there and what kind of impact fiat money has on us. Here, I think this is probably the most known of productivity and compensation, stuff like that. But there are many more that go way deeper than that, and it's a site that every Bitcoiner should at least visit once, I feel like.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of my go-to resources when people ask me about Bitcoin. I hate the word orange pill. It's so cringe. But when you're orange pilling someone, it's a great thing to show them. And for those that don't know, what happened in 1971 is the United States officially severed from the gold standard. So Nixon declared that the United States dollar is no longer redeemable for gold. And so we went to a pure fiat standard in 1971.
Oh, that's it's so normal for me already that I forget. I also was not aware of that at all before Bitcoin, and now I talk so much about it that I forget that. Actually, I think my first 1-2 years in Bitcoin, I was completely unaware of that. You need some orange, you need to go down the rabbit hole that it's normal for you. So thank you so much for doing that. That was really good.
Yeah, thanks. I found that with a lot of Bitcoin stuff. There's certain lingo or references we make, and they're so intuitive to us. But for the normal person, we're so far deep down the rabbit hole, we really have to be careful to unwind and start from the basics. And I was talking to a guy over the weekend. He was asking me about Bitcoin, and I used the phrase on chain. And he didn't know what that meant. I had to totally unwind. That on chain just means it happens on the blockchain. So there's a lot of things like that with Bitcoin. And I think the sign of a good educator or someone who really understands a subject is to be able to explain it to a 5-year-old, really simple, base level.
Yeah, and you have to be aware of what your what the other person understands and how you can translate that in understandable. I do agree with that a lot. Really cool. On the second thing of the impact of Bitcoin on the actual world, how do you think taxes and the government will develop in a Bitcoin world?
I think there's a few different ways to look at this. First, if we're on a true Bitcoin world and they can't increase the money supply, then they're going to have to cut spending, right? Because right now, governments are able to spend more money than they bring in through taxes because they can make up the surplus with effective money printing, or the deficit rather. So one thing is that'll go away. The second is the game theory really changes in a way that's favorable towards citizens, towards being taxed less. And the way this works practically is if you're a country and you want to attract capital, you want to attract the smartest people, the most money, the most well-positioned entrepreneurs in the world, if you have a really high tax rate, that's going to be very ineffective. But the problem is it's hard for capital to get out of countries on a fiat standard because most of your wealth is tied into real estate that's immovable, obviously, or it's tied into businesses that exist in a different country. And so this game theory can't really happen at scale. But with Bitcoin, You could store your wealth in your brain, 12 words in your head. You can cross borders with zero friction. And so that will enable capital to actually go to the places it's treated best. We see this already within the United States, because you have 50 states with different tax laws, and capital has gone to Florida, it's gone to Texas, it's gone to Tennessee, it's gone to places where it's treated well. And so I think on a Bitcoin standard, this idea just gets taken to the absolute extreme, because there's no way to physically stop people from bringing their wealth with them when they travel.
It's a good point of like that. And you said before that we never experienced a free market. Do you think that Bitcoin will bring that free market with like then the money itself cannot be controlled anymore?
Yeah, and I think it already has for those that choose to step into the Bitcoin world and adopt Bitcoin as a unit of account. For example, if you're a venture capitalist firm and you're totally orange pilled, Bitcoin's your unit of account, you're not going to be haphazardly shotgunning money at all these startups that may or may not succeed, right? That was kind of the play for angel investors throughout the 2010s during zero interest rate policy, was just, spray and pray. Some of these startups will hit 1,000x and I'll make all this money. But with Bitcoin, you have to be a lot more diligent at who you're giving capital to. So I think more valuable enterprises are going to get funded, and then capital destructive businesses are not going to get that. And then another area we see this is Bitcoin mining, actually. I describe Bitcoin mining as the freest market, freest competition industry in the world, because anybody can participate, whether you're small or large. If you have a source of stranded power, you can plug in and compete directly. And furthermore, the network automatically adjusts based on how many miners are competing. So when more miners plug in, difficulty increases, and the Bitcoin reward gets divided up amongst more people into smaller chunks. And so there's no one to bail you out if you're a miner, right? If you run inefficient hardware at a high electricity rate, you're going to become unprofitable when the Bitcoin price dips. And inversely, if you're a good miner, you have efficient machines and you have low cost power, when your competition capitulates, difficulty adjusts down. And so you actually benefit for being the most competitive. And so I think just looking at Bitcoin mining difficulty, the difficulty adjustments, the entire industry as a whole, you see how ruthless a true free market is, right? There's no bailouts. It's pure competition, and winners are really able to benefit. The best capital allocators win, and there's no government to print money and bail you out.
That's a good thing, and I think that's a future we want to have, and that's where we really want to get there. At least me. Really cool. I enjoyed the episode already a lot. I have one question to ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
I would say you can learn from me about the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm a Christian before I'm a Bitcoiner. It's something that's super important to me. I think Bitcoin is great because it's a tool for this earth and it can make your earthly life better, but we are all on a ticking timer, right? We will all be deceased one day. And I think there's something far more important in this life. And so if you follow me on Twitter, I tweet about that a lot. So definitely, first, I'd say read the Bible, but if you're not going to read the Bible, you can follow my Twitter feed, and I'll share some of that with you.
for the people that don't want to read the Bible, they can follow you. I love that.
Yeah. I'll give you the highlights.
Did you put that in the bio of Twitter? Like, if you don't read the Bible, just follow me.
That's a good idea, though. I should do that.
Like, I think that it's like a one-liner that portrays your values, and definitely is also really. I think that could be a good one. Thank God for Bitcoin, right? Absolutely. That's really good.
It's a more biblical, God-honoring monetary system, right? Because one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not steal. Sorry, thou shalt not steal. And so inflation is theft inherently, and Bitcoin doesn't steal from you. It's a monetary system that actually honors your rights and it doesn't take from you.
Very true, very true. We have an intro in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. The previous guest asked you the question, what's the worst thing about Bitcoin?
The worst thing is when people in your life that aren't Bitcoiners know you're into Bitcoin and they try to have conversations with you about it, and they don't know anything. It's tiresome, especially because I work in the industry. So 5 days a week, I'm thinking about Bitcoin all day long. And so on the weekends, I actually kind of want to turn my brain off, and I'd be totally chill to, talk normie, like how it catch the game last night, just like bro out. But then, you get people, Bitcoin price goes up or down. They're texting you, asking you all these questions. You meet someone new. They're like, oh, this is Mitchell. He's into Bitcoin. Like that part gets kind of old. So yeah, I would say having to talk to people that aren't into Bitcoin about Bitcoin is the worst part about being a Bitcoiner.
Yeah, especially those. It gets like repetitive, and you try like that. You try to explain the same thing over and over again to different people, and yeah, I get that a lot. It's also interesting. I just recently stopped recording on weekends. I in the beginning, so like actually up until recently, the last like 400 recordings I did like Monday to Sunday, and then I stopped on Sunday, and I stopped on Saturday also now. And it's really great to like get some power back. So I think, but just a side note there, I think that's great to have some time to power back up.
Right. To elaborate on that, it's like, what's the point of all this, right? What is the point of saving in Bitcoin, focusing on this? What's the point of money in general? It's to get your time back, right? You can always get more Bitcoin, but you can't get more time. And so, it says in the Bible, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And so Bitcoin is money. You can't love Bitcoin more than yourself. So if you find yourself, you're around your family, you're trying to have quality time, and you can't stop scrolling Bitcoin Twitter, checking the Bitcoin price, I think you should really reevaluate your priorities, because we're all here to get more money, yes, to get wealthier. But the benefit of getting wealthier is that you can spend more time doing things you love and enjoy. So don't become hyper obsessed with Bitcoin. Don't make it your idol. Go out and live your life and use it as a great tool to store your value.
Absolutely, 100% agreed. Thank you so much, Mitch, for being on the show. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you a question, and reach out to you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Mitchell Hodl, and then I also post videos for Blockware. So we're a mining as a service provider. You can find us on YouTube if you search Blockware. I've got a bunch of great videos and resources there, so definitely go check it out.
Thank you so much for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.